Since 1901, much of Africa has already warmed by more than 1 degree Celsius, with an increase in heat waves, droughts, flooding, and more. Now, while these changes are evident around the globe and can be attributed to climate change, the effect is most felt on the African continent. All areas of life across the continent are threatened, and what makes it worse is that Africa is responsible for less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, a minuscule proportion when you consider that the richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for over half of the carbon emissions. As the most vulnerable region in the world to the changing climate, how do we as Africans adapt to this new reality? What does it mean for Africa's economic progress? My name is Blessings Mosugu. Welcome to NC Exclusive. My guest today is Penda Fall. She is an African climate ambassador and green energy analyst. Penda, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Blessings.
Good morning, Penda. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, Penda, let's go straight into it. Now, although climate change is affecting the whole of the continent, it's not affecting all regions in the same way. Now, what are we seeing that is happening across the continent?
Yes, effectively, climate change is affecting all continents across the world, especially in Africa. We are experiencing rising temperature, rising sea levels, and also the coastal degradation and erosion. And this is the major challenge, especially in West Africa, where about 56% of the coastline in countries such as Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, and Senegal are eroding, and this is expected to worsen in the future. We are also experiencing food security impact, health impact, also observing this COVID-19 pandemic. This is more than a health crisis. We also have the global economy, which is affecting the COVID-19 and the climate change, which is affecting the COVID-19, the economic situation in Africa. So it's true that the climate change is not affecting the whole continent the same way, but it is really affecting our ecosystem, our biodiversity, the ocean, and the global economy.
Okay, Penda, now from what you have mentioned, and given Africa's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions at just 4%, one has to ask, why is Africa feeling the effects the most? Why are we in this region most vulnerable to climate change, despite the fact that we are the least contributors?
Yes, it's true that Africa is just contributed to 4% for in the greenhouse gases emission, but we are in the same world when you are dealing with climate change in the place. The effects of climate change are also affecting the Africa's continent. We are in Africa, we are experiencing more, especially the starvation in the Horn of Africa. The number of undernourished people is increasing according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. So it's true that the Africa continent is not contributed very importantly to climate change, but the effects of climate change are also observing in Africa. This is a little bit what we can say.
Okay. Now, from what you just mentioned, you talked about the economic impact. So I would like to stay there. Now, the consequences of climate change are showing themselves as linked to Africa's economic progress. And we know that Africa has dragged a little when it comes to economic development all the while. So now seeing that climate change is affecting our economy, I would like to ask, what other ways economically is climate change affecting Africa, the African continent?
Yes, when we analyze the economic growth in Africa and the climate change adaptation, we can see that the increasing negative impact on both the GDP per capita, and the development capacity of African countries reduce Africa's ability to cope with and prevent the current and future impact of climate change. So in the economical way, we are seeing a drop in the economic growth of the continent. So we also know that in Africa, we have a lot of countries that have a very low standard of living. So when we are dealing with an increase in the climate change effect, we are dealing with the issues of economic situation of the people in Africa. So in the economical way, let's say Africa is really impacted by climate change.
Okay, Penda, another aspect I would really like for us to look into is the gender aspect of the effects of climate change. Now, research shows that women and girls are often disproportionately affected by climate-related disasters, especially in Africa. How exactly is that?
Yes, especially in West Africa, we have a lot of potential, and you know that in Africa, agriculture is the backbone of our economy, and it accounts for the majority of our livelihood. So when we are dealing with the occurrence of more flood, more drought, we are talking about an impact on the situation of the African people, the situation of the African population. So the climate change is really an important fact that have an impact on everybody. And it is important to know that the process of climate change adaptation involves the ability of individual communities and societies to cope with and moderate the impact of climate change. So that's all.
Okay, now, Pena, let's talk about adaptability. We're talking about droughts, water scarcity, heat waves, flooding from monster storms, food insecurity, climate change induced migration, all of this in Africa. How exactly is the continent that is just developing supposed to adapt to this?
Yes, humans have been adapting to their environment for history by developing practices, cultures, and livelihood. So the occurrence of this climate-related effect, like you were saying, the flood, the drought, the land degradation, the increase in sun intensity, the starvation, all these are having an impact on the adaptation on the human. And know that when we are talking about climate change adaptation, we are asking African people to adapt to the loss of their history, to the loss of their cultures, the loss of their livelihood, or we are asking people to adapt to the starvation. And this is very difficult. So since the climate crisis is escalating, we are in the need to, yes, adapt to climate change, but we are also in the need to mitigate climate change because many people around Africa are suffering from the catastrophic effect of extreme disasters exacerbated by climate change.
All right, Penda, thank you so much as thus far. Now, another aspect is international interference. Now, the general sentiment is that Africa must demand that the West do more to help us deal with climate change. Over 12 years ago, the world's richest countries promised $100 billion every year from 2020 to 2025 to climate finance for lower income countries. Africa is a continent that is, we all know, is lower income and still developing, but they've fallen short of their pledges, and they said that the promised funding is now likely not to be delivered until 2023. And many of our economies are still struggling out of the effects of COVID-19. I mean, we just came out of a pandemic and we're struggling with the shocks of the Russia-Ukraine war as well, because we know that we import a lot of things from those countries. So how vital is this assistance to Africa's ability to adapt to climate change?
Yes, as you were saying, Africa is one of the continents where the standard of living is very low. So, in this context of climate change, African government and African population need support from national and international organizations to mitigate climate change. And we are also in the context of reducing greenhouse gases emission into the atmosphere. Because when we talk about climate change, we are talking about the increase of the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So to reduce the concentration of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we need to move to a low carbon transition. So we need to adopt some strategies, some public policies, especially focus on energy, environment, carbon pricing policies in order to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And at the international level, we are observing that a lot of policies, a lot of national adaptation plans have been adopted to cope with and moderate the impact of climate change. For example, we have the Glasgow Climate Pact, which has been adopted at the COP26, which calls for a doubling of finance in order to support in order to support developing countries to adapt and build resilience to regarding the effect of climate change. We also have the climate policy goal launched at concentrated on the Paris Agreement, which also called to build the resilience and reduce vulnerability. And under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change since the years 2011, some countries have adopted the National Adaptation Plan. And during the last days, we have seen that the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan have been adopted in order to have one more step toward achieving the climate policy goal.
Know that Africa slipped into its first recession in 25 years because of COVID-19. And millions more Africans fell into poverty because of this pandemic, and millions more are on the verge of falling into poverty. Now, many countries are struggling to meet up with the SDGs. So if we do not adapt to climate change, what does this mean for Africa's economic transformation?
Yes, the COVID-19 pandemic, we know it is more than a health crisis because it has shaken societies and economies at their core. And we know that in Africa, we have a very high number of vulnerable sectors, vulnerable populations, vulnerable communities. So it's very difficult in Africa to adapt to climate change while we are dealing with this pandemic. But until now, African governments are trying to adapt their economy, to adapt the situation, the climate situation in Africa to this pandemic, to this climate change. So it's true that the pandemic is very important in our daily life, but we are trying at all levels, at local, regional, and international level, to eradicate this pandemic.
Okay, Penda, I'd also like to ask, you mentioned the COP26 meetings. So it's bringing me back to this climate change meetings. They've had several meetings upon meetings, and we've seen so many plans for implementation. But have we exactly seen enough implementation of the plans that come out of these meetings?
The COP26 gathers a lot of countries in Glasgow, and they adopt, as I mentioned previously, the Glasgow Climate Pact. And this Glasgow Climate Pact and also the Paris Agreement are action launched to eradicate climate change. So at all levels, for example, in Africa, people are trying to launch action or to develop some project related to the UN Sustainable Development to eradicate the poverty, to develop partnership, and also to fight against climate change. So yes, we are observing a lot of effort, a lot of meeting, a lot of investment regarding this COP26 and the different commitments that have been taken.
Okay. One final question, Penda. What would be your advice for the African countries themselves? Because we've seen now that international aid is delayed for some reason. So what advice would you give the African countries as regards climate change?
Regarding climate change, what I can say is that we are in an urgent need to move toward the low carbon transition because the phenomenon of climate change is very adversely affecting our continent. And when we talk about low carbon transition, we are talking about integrating the renewable energy, the green technologies in our energy mix in order to reduce this emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. For example, when we talk about renewable energy, we talk about solar energy, we talk about wind energy, geothermal energy, and so on. About green technologies, we talk about green hydrogen technology, which can be used as a fuel to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases in the sector of transport, and it can be also used as an energy source for the electric power generation. So it's very important to move toward a low carbon transition to help population to adapt to climate change and also to try to achieve the commitment taken at the different international meetings, and also to implement policies typically in the sector of energy, because the sector of energy coupled with the sector of transport are two of the more emitted sectors in terms of greenhouse gases. So I would like to advise government, societies, and stakeholders to think about how to develop the green energy technologies in Africa, the green hydrogen technology, all this energy in order to protect our planet from the catastrophic effect of extreme disasters exacerbated by climate change.
Africa Climate Ambassador and Green Energy Analyst Penda Fall, thank you so much for joining me on NC Exclusive.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. Climate change represents a major threat to Africa, as the continent is the most vulnerable to its impact under all climate scenarios. Now, wealthier nations have to step up to support African countries in adapting to and planning for climate change, as well as paying for the loss and damage it's already incurred. But they have failed to live up to their $100 billion pledge so far, reminding us that we cannot wait for solutions outside. The climate crisis is code red for humanity, but especially so for the African continent. I'm Blessings Mosugu, and this is News Central Television.